today's episode, we're going to meet a smart, young, ambitious woman who's a recent college grad and landed one of those dream Big Five consulting jobs. But she's always wanted to buy a laundromat. As we get deeper into the episode, I'm going to talk about steps you can take before you even set foot in a laundromat to get a pretty good sense whether this laundromat is something you want to continue to pursue. How you can piece together the finances of a laundromat without ever seeing a document or talking to the owner. Hope you enjoy this episode, and let's meet our guest. This is Jason from Laundry List, and today we're speaking with...
My name's Amrita.
For this episode, it's a little interesting. I had to come down to the laundromat because we have a power outage. So most of downtown Northampton and the Smith College neighborhood, we have no power. It's a massive windstorm. So we're sort of filming in unusual conditions because the laundromat is empty. There were multiple people that have stuff in the washers and dryers, and there's nothing we can do because we have no power. So I'm going to stick around the laundromat. And this is one of those things where as an owner, you have to deal with anything that's thrown your way, and you can't predict when the power is going to go out. So here I am. If you like these videos,
make sure to like and subscribe. In the case of our video, I say it's a blessing because can't hear the dryers and washers in the background.
That is true. You always find the bright side of everything. The glass is always half full with you. Mm-hmm. Do you remember how we met?
I do.
All right, tell us the story.
Okay, so I used to go to Smith. I graduated from Smith like 3 years ago. And when I was at Smith, I used to do a radio show called 413 Ethnography, which was about interviewing and getting to know local people here in Northampton.
You started that show.
I did, yeah.
What year in college did you start that show?
It was my sophomore year, so like 2019.
Okay, right before COVID.
Yes, yeah, and I was doing months of research, getting to know a lot of people. And I remember when I was like my freshman year and through that summer, like I would walk past the laundromat, and one of my friends and I, we came in one day and we were just like hanging out here, and we met this really like eccentric person.
Wait, you're not talking about me.
No, not
a different eccentric person.
A customer. Well, he wasn't really a customer. He was kind of loitering the way we were. I called you like maybe a month or two later, and I remember when I called you, I said, "Oh, is this the owner of the Masonic Street Laundromat?" And do you remember what you said?
No.
You said, "It depends on if you're going to complain or if you're actually happy with the laundromat."
Right. No one's usually calling a laundromat with good news.
When I was saying that I had this show, I was interested in getting to know more about the laundromat and do an interview. And do you remember like what you were thinking? Were you like, am I getting scammed, or were you like actually curious?
Well, when you said you were a Smith student, I figured it probably wasn't like some kind of, spam call. Mm-hmm. I want to support college students.
You were very kind about it, and I was excited to meet you. And we met in the laundromat, and it looked definitely different than it does now. I would say like you had just bought it, I think, too, like maybe a year before that.
If that, 7, 8, 9 months at that point. Mm-hmm. And since then, we've put in a new floor, we've updated some bigger machines. Like there's been some investment since then. This is a note for people interested in laundromats or any business. It's best to give yourself 3, 6, 12 months of running the business so that you'll have a better sense of where do you want to invest money. Mm-hmm. Because I didn't know what I wanted to invest in. I knew I needed bigger machines and newer machines, but I didn't know exactly what the makeup should be. So I was taking my time to figure out what works best and getting a sense for what the business is like.
Yeah, and I think that was definitely like a big piece of our show, because you had just like, I was asking you similar questions of like, what's it like to be an owner? Had you owned a laundromat before? What kinds of questions were you asking to determine whether this was a good investment? And so I feel like your answer then is maybe like more of like a novice, and now like you have so much more experience.
I'm a seasoned pro at this point.
I know.
We met at the laundromat. You interviewed me for your first, what number podcast was it? How many podcasts did you do?
I think at that point I had done like 3 or 4.
3 or 4. So I wasn't your first choice. You almost said no.
You were not my first choice. I just had been doing months of research with other people, and then we only met later on in the process. So
you saved yourself a little bit there.
I did. And so honestly, it's a good thing because I had my technique down. I had like what kinds of questions to ask. So I think you got like a good experience.
Yes. The podcast airs, and you had some listenership, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing like your viewership.
Oh,
that's
this is
sure.
Well, we're worldwide.
And I had a lot of listeners from Smith and Northampton, and I think what was really interesting about the show is that we sort of I took footage from when I was in the laundromat, and then I took footage from us having a discussion in our studio up at Smith. And it was nice to kind of layer different narratives. And I even talked to some of the customers here.
Right. I forgot. I actually went to the studio, the recording studio. That's where you asked me a lot of the tough questions about laundromat and business and life in Northampton. So just to back up for a second, you interviewed me, but you also interviewed 10 or 15 other local businesses.
Yeah, it was sort of an esoteric group of people. Like my friend Alice, who is not a business owner, but she's a gardener, and she's lived in Northampton for 70 years or 60 years.
Yes, Alice, by the way, is in her late 80s.
89, yeah.
89, that's as late as it gets. Amrita is extremely ambitious. The fact that 15 different business owners and they're your friends. We're doing this podcast, and this is an interesting change of events. When we first met, you interviewed me. And today, I'm interviewing you. Things have come full circle. In fact, Amrita is part of the reason why I even started these YouTube channels. You wanted to know if this laundromat can double as an art gallery.
Studied and took a lot of courses in urban studies and studying space. And I think I was always curious about how art can be engaged in non-traditional spaces, especially because I've been an art student for many years as well. I love art. This felt sort of like a perfect crossroads of how can I sort of exercise that idea that I have while also getting students and local people to participate and connect with each other.
This is while being a full-time college student.
Yes.
And running your own podcast. Yeah. And pursuing squash, because you're on the squash team. You also volunteered
in the community center. Yeah.
In the community center. In all your free time, you decided, let's organize an art show. You asked what I thought of the idea. Do you remember what I said?
I don't.
I said, I think it's a great idea with one condition. You do all the work.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
You organize it, you do everything, and I will provide the space and I will support you however I can, it worked well for both of us. And I will say, as a point of business and partnership, I talked a few episodes ago about a partnership I did with Max's Mending, which there is a poster right here. This was also another creative partnership because the laundromat is part of the community. Smith College is a big part of the community. It's actually the largest employer in Northampton. And a laundromat is a community space. So why not maximize that potential and pursue this interesting partnership? Because I've never heard of any other laundromat that doubles as an art gallery, especially an unattended laundromat where we can't protect the value of the art.
That is true. So many creative students looking to share their art, and it was so much fun. I mean, it was a lot of work, but it was so much fun.
And by the way, these two pieces are still part of that art show. So we had how many pieces? About 40 or 50 pieces?
We did. And we had this big opening night.
I remember there was a couple hundred people.
Yeah, there was
during COVID.
Yeah, I know.
And we had to regulate how many people could be in the building at once. Yeah,
that's true. And we had a line out the door down the street.
We had a lot of Smith professors here.
That's true.
We had the local newspaper did a story. By any measure, I think a great success. We still have art hanging on the walls in this laundromat. You had another request. What was this request,
I'll talk
Amrita?
through it. So I mentioned I had a friend who came into the laundromat with me the first time, and her name is Beryl, and we fell in love with the laundromat. We thought it was so cute, and we loved this little window space here, so we would hang out sometimes. And so it was her birthday, and I asked Jason, is it okay if I have my friend's birthday party here?
A birthday party? That was the first time it had ever been requested that someone have a birthday party in the laundromat.
See, non-traditional spaces becoming event spaces.
And these were non-threatening people too.
What we did at the party was we had cake over there on the window seat, and then everyone threw in a piece of clothing that they wanted to wash, and we did a load of laundry.
I forgot about that.
Do you know the best part?
It's going to be when I participated in the birthday party remotely.
Yes. He has this like awesome security system where he can talk to people who are in the laundromat when he's like somewhere else. And instead of talking, he like played a happy birthday song.
A version of Happy Birthday. I Googled this, I researched it, and I blasted that version through the speaker of the security camera, and everybody stood and sang. And
we did the cake, and yeah, it was awesome.
You have frequently asked questions about not just laundromats, but business. You've always been curious about business and laundromats, and you would ask questions about what it's like owning a business or owning a laundromat. And you told me that someday you'd like to have your own laundromat.
This is still true.
You graduate, you ended up with a great internship before you graduated, like that summer. And like you were lucky. So there's a lot of Gen Zers, a lot of college students, even younger millennials that really struggle with finding jobs, finding internships. What was that process like, and how were you successful at it?
Literally, I just like worked my ass off.
That is definitely an understatement.
Not to say people now aren't, but I think I'm also just like very lucky to like have certain connections and contacts that I've like made over the years through family or friends or through Smith or my high school, where I was able to just like leverage those.
I've actually heard this regularly from people that have found themselves in successful jobs. Is it's not about sending your resume to 100 places, but selectively sending them to contacts, whether it's everything you just said, friends, family, professors, business owners.
I think that was, I mean, funnily enough, like neither like my internship position nor my full-time job I actually got through a connection because I did submit. However, I got a lot of interviews at other companies through like those connections. And I will say like that is intimidating to go through that, but you just have to like let go of your ego and remember that like a lot of these people you're asking for help had done the same thing when they were in your position
100%.
And are happy to pay it forward.
My very first job was through a contact that I met when I first lived in China, and he ended up opening a few doors for me. And that was my very first job was a result of that. So you're right. Everybody pays it forward. And when you're my age, you'll be doing the same thing.
Yes. And
probably even sooner. Like when you're 30, you'll be doing it.
I mean, I've already started doing it. Like I come back to Smith to recruit and we found some really awesome candidates. And I think that's been really nice because I can have those conversations and be that connection.
Right. So you had an internship. It was successful enough where they invited you to work full time when you graduated. That's not what happened. So we're going to let Amrita tell Amrita's story.
The company I worked for, I loved. And I wanted to go back full time, but they had just been acquired by one of the largest tech companies in the world. We're in a period of transition and they were unsure about whether they could have me back. Ended up like applying to a lot of jobs through connections and also just like online in like different types of like management consulting, which is kind of the area I wanted to go into. And I ended up picking a firm that I am been at for like 2 years this month.
It's been 2 years already. All right. So you were successful. Amrita works for, let's just say, a top 5 consulting firm, one of those lovely jobs that everybody would love to have, and it's based in Boston. And you come back to Northampton because you are part of their recruitment out of an interview process for Smith and other colleges, or just Smith?
Yeah, I mean, I've been to a couple other schools, like we go to like Amherst College, like similar schools in the Northeast. When I started, I was like, why aren't we recruiting at Smith? Like I went there, there's so many.
And they're like, yeah, you're the perfect person to go out and recruit. So have you hired anyone from your interviews?
We did. We hired somebody as part of the internship, and they're a wonderful intern. So
is this your dream job? Because everybody thinks that their first job is going to be that's their dream job.
I'd like to offer an unpopular opinion, which is I don't believe that there's a dream job.
I'm in it. This is the dream job.
Aside from this job,
aside from
there's no dream job for me.
Remember when you were going through the interview process, I kept telling you, don't worry if this isn't your dream job. Use it as a stepping stone because it'll help the rest of your career. And I remember I said, I promise you, you won't be with this company for more than 5 years. Now, you will probably prove me wrong, but
I will say, although I don't believe in a dream job, I do believe in generally being happy at your job. And I will say, as far as like jobs go, I'm very happy at my job.
Well, you don't hear that often, so that's good to hear. I'm not surprised you're happy because it's that glass half full attitude that you go through life. Every once in a while, you will send me a text from a laundromat.
That is
and
true.
It doesn't matter where in the world you are.
That's true.
You're like, what do you think of this laundromat? This segues nicely into how do you buy a laundromat and what is the process from when you first think you might want to buy a laundromat? What does that process look like? Amrita, why are you interested in laundromats? Because you've definitely expressed over the few years that you'd like to own a laundromat. And I said, great, let me know when you want to buy one. Why are you interested and what are you going to do about it?
That's a good question and something I do think about often because I'm serious about this dream job. Maybe there's like two main areas I feel like are most important to me. I think one, and maybe the more like common answer, is just sort of like autonomy and like owning my own business.
Control. That's something I talk about a lot as an entrepreneur. It's about controlling your own destiny. For me, it was never about, I want to make a ton of money. I always thought, of course, if you have your own business, there's the potential to make a lot of money, but it was about controlling my life. And
absolutely.
Okay, so you're echoing that sentiment about like most entrepreneurs have. Absolutely,
having flexibility. But I do think the second reason, and maybe more in the vein of like what we've already been talking about, is the idea of being this like community institution. Like it is, like it really is. And being something so mundane, but also so crucial to everyday life. I think that's really nice. And being a local business owner, like you can choose to be in your shop as much or as little as you want and still be that like face that everyone can like count on. And I think that's really valuable too. And I really like that idea of being embedded in community very locally and having the opportunity to like share my space in non-traditional ways, as we talked about. And then just generally being an active participant in other people's lives.
The thing about laundromats is, and I didn't ever think about this when I was buying mine or until someone said this to me about a year or so ago. I was at some party or something and they said, oh, what do you do? And I said, oh, I own a laundromat. And they said, oh, those are supposed to be great businesses, but they're not glamorous at all. And it stopped me in my tracks for a second. I said, not glamorous. I didn't buy a laundromat or any business because I thought it was glamorous. And there is a little bit of a stigma to some degree about laundromat ownership. And it's just not a fancy, fun, white collar kind of associated business. And I say to all of that, I could care less. It's a good business. It's a simple business. It's not easy, but it's a simple business.
And at the end of the day, you get to take all those quarters home.
And I take all the quarters home, or bills. I leave the quarters in the change machine. The interesting thing is, your generation and people with college degrees, laundromat ownership is not the career of choice, right? Like you're never going to come out of a college and say, Mom, Dad, I'm going to work in a laundromat, or I'm going to work in a laundromat so that I can earn equity in a laundromat and then eventually buy a laundromat. I've always said that if I went back in time, I would have hopefully bought my first laundromat when I was in my mid-20s, so that when I was in my mid-50s, I'd have 20 laundromats. That's how good of a business it can be if you do it right. You've gone a very different career path, a good career path, but different than laundromat ownership. In fact, you probably have very little control over your schedule.
That is true.
And it's like the opposite of what the ultimate goal is for you. But that's okay because you're young and you're doing the things now to set yourself up for that future ownership.
Yeah, that's true. And can I just say as an aside, when you were like, oh, I want to graduate college and work at a laundromat. When I was in college, I would spend so much time here that random people would ask me if I worked here. And I would proudly say yes, because it's like, felt like an honor to like be part of this space.
Thank you. That's kind of you to say. It's definitely not the path that you took when you graduated. How do you get to laundromat ownership, whether you're in your late 20s, your 30s, and the other demographic is people over the age of 50, where they're looking to either retire with passive income or one foot out the door in full-time employment, and they want to begin to replace income without having to work 40 hours or 50 hours a week. Because there are people watching that do want to take those steps to get from point A to point B into laundromat ownership? Because for me, I didn't really think about it. I had the capital. I bought a laundromat. It was one of 6 or 7 or 8 different businesses I've owned over the years. That's not the majority of people that are looking to get into laundromats. Do you know what the path would be for you to get into laundromat?
Being in a place where you can see yourself for a long time. I also am new to working, and I want to save money so I can actually invest in a laundromat and be in a place where I'm not struggling to get started. And
so that to me is one of the smartest things you could have said about when you want to take the first step to getting into business. And I've recommended this in a previous podcast. I think it's so important to have a little bit of financial stability, which is exactly what you're talking about. You need to save enough money where you're not shackled by every decision, because you won't have the freedom to make the right decisions if you don't have the capital or the money to do it.
Let me ask you, over the last 6 years, at what point in those 6 years did you have the highest costs to yourself?
Probably when I invested in 4 new big machines.
And this was early on?
That was about year 2.
Okay.
Year 2 to year 3, but that was the highest cost, but that was by choice. And that was a very calculated decision, because I knew having bigger machines would do a couple things. Number one, it would increase the amount of revenue per square foot. So instead of me in one of these machines behind me, instead of me getting $5 per wash per square foot here, I could get $10 to $12 for the same amount of space. And it's not that people are paying any more. They're not. They're just getting a larger capacity. And because I have limited space, this is only 1,000 square feet, I need to maximize my dollar amount per square foot. It's like a Walmart, like any retailer. One of the ways to do it is to have bigger machines. Bigger machines means you charge more. When you charge more, your revenue goes up. So I was able to, at the same time that I invested in these machines, I was also able to increase my revenue because now I had larger capacity and people are willing to pay for it.
Yeah.
The other thing was I now had the ability to increase the number of customers that came to this laundromat. And by that, I mean, I couldn't offer people comforters, right? I couldn't wash comforters because I didn't have machines big enough. When I invested in big machines, now I opened up a customer base that they have their own machines at home, but their king size, queen size comforters don't fit in those machines. So where are they going to come? And I happen to live in the Smith College neighborhood. They come to the laundromat to wash those big comforters. So now I grabbed a new customer base. And in addition, my existing customers would bring in their larger items as well, instead of going to a competitor or wherever they were going, if they went anywhere with it. That is why I invested in big machines. And while that was the highest expense year for me, or 2, it was also the highest revenue years, because the revenue was increasing as a direct result of the investment.
True.
Let's suppose that you decide you're going to buy a laundromat, and now you see a laundromat you're interested in. What do?
First, I bug the owner.
A different owner, not me.
Yeah,
well, you'll text me
too. It could
too.
be your laundromat, maybe. Bug the owner. And I think one of the key things I learned from you is perseverance, because you bugged the owner many, many times, the previous owner to this laundromat. I think I'd also need to do my own background research.
All right, well, let's start there. So background research, where do you start? Like, what would your instincts tell you about background research? Because a lot of people, when they first think they want to buy a laundromat, it starts with background research. And I think it's actually pretty simple, but where would you start?
Revenue areas and cost areas.
All right, so revenue and cost. Even before you get to revenue and cost, the first thing I'd recommend to anyone, check Google ratings, Google reviews, Google business profile. That will tell you so much. For example, let's suppose there's a laundromat that you like. It has 3.6 stars, right? Maybe there's 50 reviews. You begin to look at the reviews. You begin to learn a little bit about the owner, because people are going to say nice and bad things, and you're going to take the average. But if you begin to see a pattern, by the way, 3.6, you can do better, right? To me, that's an opportunity. And maybe there's a reason. Maybe someone else bought the laundromat and it had terrible reviews before they bought it, and they didn't have the ability to increase those ratings, in the short amount of time that they've owned it. But from the Google reviews, you can piece together a picture of a laundromat. There's also going to be pictures. So you can begin to look at the pictures. So even if I'm not sitting, in Boston or wherever someone is living when they want to buy a laundromat, I can look in Google and begin to see what's going on with this laundromat, right? If you find out that the owner is a nice person and they're getting some good reviews in the last, like, let's say 12 months, that owner is probably approachable, right? That'll give you a sense for, is this an owner that might be receptive to a phone call? Like when you called me, I didn't hang up the phone, right? Like if you were to look at the reviews that I have, you might begin to sense, all right, this is a guy that might actually, whether he wants to sell or not, he may actually take my phone call and meet with me because he's like, he knows there's nothing to lose by having a conversation. So I would start with Google reviews. Then what's the next thing that you do? You want to look at revenue and expense. How do you do that? Because you can't just walk into especially an unattended laundromat and say, hey, can you tell me how much money you make? Because a lot of people won't, share that information.
Are there sites online that give good advice on kind of doing that kind of assessment?
Besides this channel? Actually a website called Laundromat Resource, and they have a bunch of tools. But even before you get into those tools, my advice would be walk into the laundromat. Take a look around. Number one, how much do they charge for a wash? If they charge, and let's just keep the number simple, if they charge $5 for a wash and they have 20 machines, on average across the United States, the number of turns per day, that means how many times is that machine used per day. If the average turns per day is 2.6, which let's just round up and say 3, one machine is producing $15 of revenue per day, right? If they have 20 machines, now you multiply that. So you can begin to put together the revenue perspective.
Is that true?
That's pretty much true.
3
you're going to be fairly accurate. The average turns per day across the country, I believe, is 2.7.
Oh wow!
Right, as an average.
Would be higher.
Everyone does. Why do you think people do wash, dry, fold? Because it's a way to utilize the machines without having customers coming in, because they know that the machines are very underutilized. Like right now, we have no power. Once you know your revenue of the washing machines, what's the next revenue number that you need? Dryers. Dryers tend to be anywhere from 35 to 45% of your wash revenue. So if your wash revenue is, let's say, $100 a day, your drying revenue is going to be $40. So now in one day, that laundromat's doing $140. Multiply it times 30, and you can begin to piece together what the revenue looks like. Now, the one complication about knowing what the total revenue is, you have to know what percentage of their business is wash, dry, fold, because that's very different pricing. The amount of revenue per wash is going to be very different than on a self-service unattended laundromat. But once you know your revenue, now you can begin to figure out what the expenses are. Well, if you were to do your research, you'd probably see that utilities tend to run at, let's just say, 20% of your revenue. Your rent, your target is you want it to be around 25% of your total revenue, but maybe it's closer to 40 or 50%. It depends on the area, depends on the volume of the business.
Right.
So your rent's going to be big, utilities are going to be big, and the other big expense tends to be labor, if it's a wash, dry, fold. I don't have labor because this is an unattended laundromat. I don't do wash, dry, fold. So what are the other things? Maintenance. Maybe that's going to run at 5% of your revenue. Eventually, you begin to piece together what you think the numbers look like before you've even spoken to the owner, right? Now you go speak to the owner. How do you approach an owner? You're pretty good at approaching people. What do you do?
Find a phone number online, call them, show up every day.
Hope they answer.
If they don't answer, show up, keep showing up.
Right, walk into the laundromat.
Be persistent.
And eventually you will find someone that either works there or maybe owns it. Rita, you have found the owner. You've spoken to the owner.
Okay, yay.
Now, there's one problem. You have a cash shortfall of $500,000.
Oh, no.
So what do you do if you can't necessarily afford it? Maybe you've saved $100,000 after working for 4 or 5 years, right? And you know that you're serious. You know that you have cash that can sustain yourself for the business, but you can't necessarily get a loan from the bank. So one thing you can do is you can ask the owner about owner financing. And an owner may say, listen, I want to know that you're serious. Maybe you need to put down a small percent. Maybe they're going to say, put down 10%. Maybe that's $50,000 on a $500,000 laundromat. And they're going to finance the rest. right?
Okay.
450,000, maybe they'll say, you're going to pay me over 10 years. You're going to pay me X amount per month.
Mhm.
If you miss one payment, they're going to take the laundromat back.
Mm.
But that's one way that you can actually buy a laundromat
I did not know that.
without having a lot of money.
That's cool.
And because this episode's getting long, we will end it here, but there's future episodes about buying laundromats, how to approach owners, and what numbers to look for, and how to piece together what I would call your due diligence for laundromats. We are now in the bonus round of this interview.
Okay.
It is a chance for you to win free vending from my vending machine.
Oh my God, stakes are high.
How many years has this been a laundromat? What year was this laundromat founded?
So if I think back to the history of Northampton, I feel like most of this development was like 100 years ago, and at least the newer buildings here.
That's probably
100
correct.
years ago, maybe a little bit more.
This is a long way of getting to the answer.
Yes, got to use logic to get there.
Okay, all right.
So I assume this building was constructed within the last 100 years. Maybe it wasn't always a laundromat, but the masthead on the building looks pretty old. So I feel like...
You are correct. It was not always a laundromat.
Okay. I feel like somewhere in like maybe the 60s or the 70s, but I probably should pick a decade or a year. What is the...
You should pick a year, because you need to tell me how many years has this been a laundromat.
Yeah. I'm going to say like 62 years.
That is remarkably close. You are going to get free vending.
What's the right answer?
The correct 100% answer is 67. This is the 67th year. This laundromat was founded in 1958.
Oh my God, that was so close.
It is probably one of the top 5 oldest, most continuous businesses in Northampton.
That's awesome.
This is the luck Amrita brings. Just as we finished filming, the power came on. So Amrita, you brought the power.
Yes, you're very welcome.
This is Jason from Laundry List.
The best place for brainwashing.